Hi, everyone, and welcome to this short video on sport event governance. I'm Milena Parent, I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa, and I'm going to take you through what this means for the next about 10 minutes or so. So, what is sport event governance? Well, we're going to start by looking at the definition briefly, but then it's kind of broad, so we will break that down and look at what it means in terms of the organizing committee of the event, as well as all the stakeholders around the event. So the definition of sport event governance, and interestingly enough, before this, I was asked to do this, I've never been asked the question. So that was actually quite a surprise for me. Sport event governance essentially is the systems and organizations that direct, regulate, and control a given sport event. So in other words, it's very high level. It's the strategic steering of your sport event, for example. So what does that mean? Well, when we are looking at the governance of sport events themselves and their environment, their context is very complex. So we have to consider all of this when we look at governing or steering the event. So what does that mean? It means we're looking at the structures and the processes. So the who, what, when, where, why, and how. The how would be the mechanisms or the processes. We're looking at the institutions and the procedures. So that's, for example, the rights that you have as an organizer, the rights that you have as a sponsor, as an athlete, as a participant, as a spectator, the rules around participating around your sport event, everything from the field of play to protocol, the policies in place, and also the actions of the individuals that are involved. So the actions of the athletes, the actions of you as an organizer. Now, if we're talking about a very local sport event in a city, they can be essentially you're dealing with city or municipal level or local level stakeholders. Yet you are still looking at multi-jurisdictional or different types of levels, regardless of even if you're at the local level. So yes, you have your local sport organizations and your municipal government, let's say, but you will have people coming from perhaps outside the city. As you move up in your event, in making it a regional event, a national event, a continental event, or international event, now we're adding multiple layers or levels of the sport system. So you have now not only the local, but you're going to have, let's say, the national level sport organizations, the regional and national governments. And if we have the international level, then we have international federations, continental federations, international service organizations like WADA or the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And so you're seeing multiple levels that are now involved in a more international event. And finally, regardless of the event that you have, you'll be dealing with different sectors. So it's a multi-sectoral context in that your event may be an not-for-profit. Your local club could be an association, not-for-profit, or a foundation, depending on your country. But you may be dealing with sponsors who are private, commercial, or for-profit organizations, and you're probably going to be dealing some way with the government, which is a public organization. And so again, not only do we have multiple levels, but we have multiple sectors in your particular event context that you have to govern. So you as an organizing committee are essentially a coordinating entity, and you're outsourcing a lot of your work. You're not doing everything by yourself. So what will happen is from the first day of the event being given to you to host, your structure, your organizational chart, your organizational structure and hierarchy will evolve. You'll add more people. It could be all volunteers. It could be a mixture of staff and volunteers, maybe a small set of staff for many years, like in the Olympic Games. And all of a sudden it starts to grow in terms of staff. And finally, the volunteers come in for games time. So every single day, your event organizational chart will be slightly different than before. And when you move from your planning stage to implementation to the games time, you're going to be moving from the headquarters to the venues and to the venue teams, which is kind of like a matrix structure. So you're even changing the type of hierarchy that you have. So when you're thinking of an organizing committee, what is it? Well, in essence, it will undertake a project. The event has a predefined timeline, beginning and end, but the organizing committee also has a start from the time the bid was won until, if it's a one-off event, then maybe 6 months to 12 months after the event when you close your books and cease to exist. It's a business, even if it's nonprofit. You're still, Olympic Games have multi-million and multi-billion dollar budgets. It's also a cause or social enterprise, whether it's sport, or whether you're focusing on particular, you want to have certain legacies, sport for development, let's say promoting women in sport, or equity owed, or groups. And so you may have a particular cause as well that you're promoting through your potential, the leveraging of your stakeholders, the legacies that you want to plan, and sustainability mandates that you may be given or want to undertake. You will also have multiple strategic alliances and partnerships with different partners, different stakeholders, your sponsors, venue owners, service organizations, let's say like food and beverage providers. And it's also quite a political entity. The moment we have people involved, there will be politics in the negative and the positive sense, in terms of political activity being not only what we think of governments, but also what, in terms of enacting power. So, you're the CEO of, or the president of the organizing committee has a certain amount of power and will enact that over his or their subordinates. So I mentioned the planning and implementation, but this is essentially every single event will go through these 3 modes of governance. First, your first mode, you're in planning, whether you may have a bid committee that may be distinct depending on the type of event that you have. That will transition, when you're successful, into an actual organizing committee. And the planning will continue because you'll have a business plan, you'll have an operational plan, you'll have divisional plans or work packages. So all of that needs to be done during that time. Then that lasts about half the organizing committee's life. Then it turns into you move into your implementation mode, and that's a shift in mentality in terms of governing, because now you're taking all the plans that you've written down, obviously typed in the computer, and you're moving them into what they will look like in the venue. So what is a day in the life of an athlete will look like in your venue? A volunteer, a media person, a VIP, a spectator. So all of those plans that you had before will get integrated into each of the venues that you will have for your event. And then finally, we have the actual event time or games time, the opening ceremonies, the sport events, and then sport competitions, and then the closing ceremonies. But there's a third mode. So after all this, when most people are gone, they're finished, they've left town, you are then moving into the wrap-up mode, which is now you're going to look at closing the books, decommissioning the venues. You're looking at also developing or transferring any potential legacies to whichever organization will be leading those efforts, because most likely, if you're one-off, you will cease to exist within that 6 to 12-month period. If you're a recurring event, the wrap-up, you'll have also a report, regardless if you're one-off or recurring, and that report, the recommendations and what we would want to do differently next year, for example, will then be fed back into the planning mode for your next year. If you're one-off, the final report gets given to the next edition host. So finally, we have the stakeholders. So stakeholders, broadly speaking, is any individual, any group, any organization that is affected by or can impact the organizing committee's actions. So that is actually quite broad if you think about it. And here is a map, an example of a major sport event and all its different stakeholders. So you can see in technically speaking, the board of directors is your focal organization, because if we're in a small local sport event, you may only have a board of directors and they're volunteers, and they pretty much do everything. They run the event itself. But as you get to a bigger event, at a higher level event, you start getting levels, and you will have staff and or volunteers. So that is your organizing committee. So you have the organizing committee, you have the community, so that's your residents, your schools, your activists, your community groups. You have your media, TV, radio, print, digital, social media. You have your host governments, the local to the federal or national level, depending on the event that you have. For a major sport event, you would have up to the federal level, because there'll be questions of visas, security, health, that often are the jurisdiction of the federal level or national level. You have your delegations, your athletes, and the different delegations, the mission staff, and the athletes' entourage, like their coaches, physiotherapists, etc. The various sport organizations, so your local sport organizations, all the way up to the international level, depending on your exact event, and also the event owner, because you're not necessarily the owner of the event. You may be, but let's say we talk about the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games, the IOC is the owner, which is different than the organizing committee itself. And finally, we have the sponsors as well, at different levels. And there could be other stakeholders depending on your particular context, whether it's non-governmental organizations, maybe WADA or the Court of Arbitration for Sport, special interest groups like First Nations, Aboriginal groups, the venue owners, any consultants you bring in, anybody else. So you can see that in blue are your stakeholder groups, but in black are all the different stakeholders. Now, there's one problem with this map. What do you think it is? Just looking at how everything is related, what do you think the issue is in terms of looking at how the organizing committee has to manage all the different stakeholders or govern them? Well, everything looks like it's going through the board of directors, which in reality, anybody who's done an event, the board of directors will interact obviously with some stakeholders, but the organizing committee staff and volunteers are the ones that will do most of the interactions. And the stakeholders will also talk to each other. So the event owner may talk to the sponsors. So not everything goes through the board of directors. So to give you a better image, if we take, we'll go back for a second. If you look at the local host government, so at the top of the screen, you have the local bubble, which is the local government. Here's one example. This is Whistler for the Vancouver 2010 Games. Whistler was the mountain municipality in charge of all the mountain sports. And this is its stakeholder network. So you can see how the W2010 is the Whistler 2010 Secretariat, and they were quite central because it's the biggest node or square, a blue square in this case. And you can see that they communicate with many different stakeholders, including VANOC, the organizing committee. Now, if we take, this was a municipal local government. Now, if we take the federal government, so still the same stakeholder group, still the governments, but now we're looking at the federal government. Here is what it looked like. This is an actual image of a communication network and the interactions between all the different departments and groups involved in the 2010 games that were related to the Canadian government. So we're looking actually at over 600 and some different nodes or actors or stakeholders, groups, organizations, etc., and over 250,000 people at the national level that were coordinating their efforts. And this is just, again, that top bubble in terms of the governments. Now imagine if you add the sport organizations, the community, the media, the sponsors, the other stakeholders. Like, the network is huge for a major sport event. And that is what it means. Not to scare you, that's what it means to actually really govern an event, is that you have to oversee this whole process, but you're outsourcing a lot of these responsibilities. So there's a lot of stakeholders. Again, not to panic. Not everybody is as important all the time. Any stakeholder can be critical or important at any one time for any particular issue. So if we take you, like, let's say the environmentalists, the activists, they will be interested in anything related to environmental issues, sustainability issues. They may not care so much about the food and beverage that of the athletes. So that the food and beverage issue is not so much of a concern. The cutting of trees for a venue is of their concern. So two different files, they're important for one, but not for the other. At the same time, depending on who you talk to in the organizing committee, each manager will have a different conceptualization of who is more important. So the head of marketing in the organizing committee will obviously see the sponsors as critical, whereas the head of the sport division will see the sport federation, whether local clubs all the way to the international federations, as more important. So depending on what your role is, your perception of this whole network of stakeholders will change, and your governance of the network will modify, obviously. So in summary, sport event governance is about strategic steering of the sport event. It's a complex endeavor. It's multi-jurisdictional and multi-sectoral when you look at all the different stakeholders and levels and types of stakeholders that you're having to deal with. And so as an organizing committee, you coordinate this whole system and you outsource a lot of the initiatives. But that's what it means, is that your coordination aspect essentially is, this is what we're talking about when we say the governance of the event, is that you need to steer everybody in that one direction that you've set out. So thank you for listening to me on sport event governance. And I look forward to talking to you live at one point.